Welcome back to the Multifamiliar Podcast, where we explore the real stories and strategies behind the building lasting wealth, impact, and the purpose through business and real estate. I'm your host, Alemdar, joined by my co-host, Cheddy Matthews. So today we're diving into an industry that blends compassion with the business leadership, senior living. We're honored to be joined by Chad Anfinson, the Executive Vice President of Operations at Silver Treasures Senior Living, based in Jacksonville, Florida. He's a seasoned leader with more than 20 years of experience in the senior care industry. Chad holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and marketing from the University of Minnesota. And throughout his career, he's combined his business leadership with a genuine passion for serving others. He spent decades in building and guiding senior living communities, developing teams, and mentoring operators to deliver both exceptional care and operational excellence. So, from leadership and staffing to the future of senior living, today's episode is packed with insights for investors, entrepreneurs, and anyone interested in creating meaningful impact through business. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Sure. So we're excited to dive into your journey and the lessons you'll learn along the way.
Yeah.
And so I would like to start this. I mean, can you share a little bit about your background with your own words and what inspired you to get involved in the elder care industry?
It's funny. It's like I think as we get older, you kind of look back and you say you know why you got into something, but when you're in it, you don't really know. So a lot of people say, "Oh, I just kind of fell into it." But I used to say that quite a bit, and then I realized that I always had like a connection to the older population. Um, and my mother owned beauty salons in a retirement area, and I spent a lot of time in that beauty salon. During the summer times, it was difficult to have the kids in daycare or babysitters or what have you. It was expensive, so I went to work with my mom a lot of times, and I came across a lot of her clients were getting their hair done at her salon, what they called updos, and the getting their hair done every week. So I would see the same people all the time, and I would sit at this table in the front lobby, and there were all these magazines, and I was drawing and coloring, and these little ladies would come in and they throw candy at me or kiss me on the cheek or pat me on the head. And I just got really comfortable with that age demographic from a very young age. So later on in life, after college graduation, I I kind of fell into the marketing side of it, the sales and marketing side, and it just happened to be my very first building that I was associated with and company that I was associated with. Directly across the street, my grandmother lived in this neighborhood, and it was an older neighborhood, meaning the people there were over the age of 65. And I spent a lot of time with her that summer, and I remember her saying, "Hey, you need to get a job." So I had this sales background. I saw this thing right across the street. It says, sales, looking for sales directors, what have you. So someone who is very approachable and somebody who can speak to almost anybody. I've got the gift of gab. I walked in, said, "I'm interested in interviewing." Next thing you know, I have an interview. 2 weeks later, I have a job in senior sales, and I've never done it before, but I was compassionate and I knew which direction I wanted to go. And then from that day on, I just started climbing the ladder and moved in from sales to regional sales to divisional sales, and then got into operations, and then got my administrator's license, all this other stuff. And again, I say I fell into it, but now that I think about it, I was kind of carved to do it, is what I would say.
That's interesting. We talk about people having a business or a calling. And this seems like a profession that you're in that is both a business and a calling. Can you explain a little bit? I mean, in your perspective, does that make sense? How this is my passion and profession, a bit of both?
Yeah. Growing up, I used to tell people, they'd say, well, what are you going to go to college for? And I'd say, I want to build, manage, and market my own business. Right. So I always had this from the time that I can recall. I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit. Right. And I knew it was going to come along in terms of on the business side. I knew at some point I was going to own and operate my own business of some form, or I was going to help others do it. Um, in terms of helping people, you know, I'm very passionate about helping others. I don't look for anything in return. I think with senior care, you have to have that because that's what you're doing. You're helping people every single day, and you're building these relationships not only with the residents that are inside your communities, but also the community as a whole, the community that you service. So you're building these relationships and helping them, providing them solutions. So yeah, I could have went into the golf business. I could have went into auto dealer business. I love cars. I could have went into so many different areas, and not that those things don't cross my mind as an entrepreneur, but when I think about it, it's hard. It has been very hard for me to get to tear away from senior housing, senior living. Very hard, just because I feel so strongly about it, and I feel like I can make a difference. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I feel like I can change the landscape of how we are currently doing it. I feel like I still haven't accomplished what I was meant to accomplish, if that makes sense.
It definitely
Yeah,
does. Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and then, what are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about assisted living or senior care facilities business? You think, based on your,
Yeah.
the experience?
We still fight the I don't want to send my mom to a home. We still fight that, right? So that's one misconception. Assisted living is pretty simple. The definition is real basic. We assist residents in remaining independent. That's all assisted living is. We're not in a skilled setting. We're not providing we're providing what's called activities of daily living. We're providing assistance with the activities of daily living, and in short, that is bathing, dressing, grooming, eating, toileting, mobility, uh, redirection, queuing, prompting, med assistance. We're not getting into the skilled settings. That's more in the skilled nursing facilities, or what they used to call skilled nursing homes. So there's that misconception, right? Um, so we fight that a little bit on the marketing side and the sales side. In terms of the investment side or the owner operator side, it's not an easy business. It's not. It, it is real estate based. It is. So there is a real estate component to it. But I think the misconception is that you open a building and you provide care, and that it's fairly simplistic, but it's not. It's pretty involved. There's a lot of different agencies that you have to adhere to, a lot of different regulations, or a lot of different regulatory. It's not a cross state guidelines. Each state has their own regulations. Some of them are similar, some of them are way off, some of them allow you to do things above and beyond. Um, the one that seems to be the most consistent is that when you hire, uh, let's say you hire a nurse, the misconception is that the nurse, he or she, can do everything that their license allows them to. But the reality is that said nurse is licensed and governed by the license of the building. So just because they had all this skill set, they're not going to be able to use that skill set, injections or wound care or something of that nature, they're not going to be able to use that skill set because you're governed by the license of the building. So that's
Yes.
kind of a misconception.
Mhm.
You know, being that it's a tough business to do, that still doesn't mean that you shouldn't look at it as an avenue from an investment standpoint, or an
Mhm.
avenue of from an owner operator standpoint. It
Yeah.
probably, and this might dive a little deeper into your question, but
Mhm.
it's probably one of the more stable scenarios. It's one of the more stable businesses. If you take a look at, 2008, when we had an economic
Yeah.
decline, senior living, assisted living in particular, I think it grew like 2% year over year in an economic
Wow.
downturn. If
Wow.
you take a look at COVID, the 2020, the misconception was, there were some rules and laws that we had to follow. But if you take a strong look at memory care, we still were moving people in. Now we had protocols and we had rules to follow, but memory care didn't take as bad of a hit, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
It stunted assisted living, but it only stunted assisted living because we were trying to keep others that were currently in assisted living safe. So the misconception, even though it's a tough business to operate, it's a very rewarding business, and
Yeah.
not only from a compassion side, but also too from a financial side.
Okay. So with this, from your perspective, then what differentiates a good facility from a great one in terms of this operation, care,
Um,
culture, and community? So there's like a little
yeah,
nuance between the good and great. We always aim great, right?
yeah. Well, I'll give you something that was said to me a long time ago. I spent multiple years with a particular organization as a troubleshooter. I was the guy that when you weren't operating well, or you had regulatory issues, or you had staffing problems, or you had high turnover, or whatever the case may be, I was the guy they sent in. And I would go to a particular building, travel away, and I remember putting in all these changes into this one building. And about 3 months later, at the time, my senior vice president, who I worked underneath, said, I just don't think this is working. I'm not seeing the changes on paper. I'm not seeing it, right? So my exact response was, you know, not are we, we're not always going to see the changes on paper. Sometimes the changes that we put into place are long term changes that we will see at a future date. So what differentiates good from great? Culture. um, we can look at financials all day long. We can take a look at it, and obviously I can look at apples to apples, units to units, the amount of doorknobs to doorknobs. I can look at rent rate to rent rate all day, and those are going to be factored on a lot of different factors. But at the end of the day, I've seen buildings that were built 40 years ago that you walk in and you just got a great feeling. You had a great feeling when you left there. You were not concerned that the building was 45, 40 years old. You had no concerns whatsoever. When you left there, you would say to yourself, I could see myself living here, right? Versus a brand new building that's got all the bells and whistles and all the amenity centers and multiple dining rooms, or restaurants is what we call them, you know multiple areas of activities and engagement rooms, and your feeling there was just cold. It just
Mhm.
this isn't I just don't see it. It's too big. And you would walk out of there with like a negative terminology. Not that it was bad, but you just said, I don't feel comfortable, right? So numbers are always going to separate buildings. Rent rate's going to separate buildings. NOI is going to separate buildings. Margins are going to separate buildings. But at the end of the day, culture, in my opinion, is something that can take a community to the next level. And that starts at the top, and that starts at the owning property, whoever owns the property, and then who's managing the property. That it's 100%.
Wow. Thank you for that. That was actually really deep. And you went into it a little bit, but I'm going to dive into this question a little more. I like
Okay.
numbers, and there's a whole bunch of analytical people out there. So, what are some of those key metrics, indicators that you track on a daily, weekly, on a periodic basis to kind of
Yeah.
ensure the business is running smoothly? Just from your standpoint, what are those kind of numbers that we should be looking
Oh,
at in this
yeah.
space?
You just struck a heart chord with me because I'm a numbers guy too. I'll start with this one: operating expense ratio. Right. What's my total operating expense as it pertains as total percentage of operating expense? Where am I trying to get to? What is my, and we call that OER. What's my revenue per unit and revenue per resident? In the apartment complexes, you probably focus on revenue per unit. In the assisted, we look at two different models. We look at revenue per unit. We look at revenue per resident, because we go to an apartment, husband, wife, uh, two females that are trying to cut costs maybe, and we look at it and say, well, we may be getting $3,000 more out of that particular unit because we have two residents in there. So we look at resident or revenue per resident. um, I love food cost numbers. Raw food numbers. You have to take a real good look at that. You can always tell with a raw food number, if you compare it to the national averages or state averages geared towards senior living, you can always tell how you're ordering, if your food service director is ordering correctly, if there's food going out the back door, if you're wasting food. I mean, you can look at that. I can look at that just by a number and comparing it to the menu. If I see a menu and you give me what's called a PRD, per resident per day, how much am I spending per resident per day? If you give me that number and I get a menu, I can tell you if we're wasting food, if food's walking out the back door, or if we're not ordering appropriately. Um, Another one is, obviously we get in. Some people use, EBITDARM, EBITDA. I tend to use net operating income quite a bit. That's always an important number, obviously. I used to dive into profit margins quite a bit. We used to kind of base our rent revenues. I used to base off of where I wanted my operating expenses, what I knew I was going to pay out for operating expenses, and then what margin was I trying to reach. So I kind of would take a look at it that way. Um, yeah, so but there's quite a few metrics that I look at on a regular basis. If somebody hands me a financial sheet, a profit and loss statement, I can rip through it and kind of tell you, here's where we can trim. And this is one that I speak with a lot of people about. And it's one that we all should be focused on because it's the one that is going to continue to increase and outpace what we can acquire from a rent rate. And that is labor to revenue. Um, our industry is heavily based on labor. We are a labor intensive business, and with that being said, we have to be very efficient as while we're also trying to provide great quality of services. So we have to look at that quite a bit. That can be a make or break scenario in terms of investing in a property.
Got it. I want to go into that. I want to dig a little deeper into that. You mentioned human capital, and you earlier you spoke about, we get this right, culture kind of trumps some of the other metrics, some of the hard numbers, and some of the hard data.
Yeah.
So if staffing, if human capital, human resources, whatever you want to call it, the people aspect is so important. What do you what do you consider some of the biggest challenges in the industry? How do you attract, recruit, retain, train, and motivate great caregivers because it's so essential to the success of your industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easy one is you have to be competitive in the market. You've got to do some SWOT analysis. You got to do some competitive analysis. You got to know, where are all your competitors starting, and in terms of wage rate. With that being said, you also too, on what I would call like second level competitors, where could my staff member go and work that wouldn't be associated with my industry, right? So, for us in Florida, especially in Florida, we have caregivers that they're not technically, I mean, they're caregivers, but they could go work at a fast food restaurant and possibly make $2 more an hour, right? So then you're kind of, on the marketing side of things, you're really marketing towards people that want to help others. They know that they're not going to, um, you know, buy the next McLaren on their wage rate, but when they leave, they feel good about what they do, right? So we're still attracting staff members like the old school ways, is what I would tell people. You still have to stick to the Facebook. You have to stick to the word of mouth. You have to, use your friends, ask them, we're looking for this, we're looking for that. You have to still use all those measures. And then you've got to tie in some of the technology that's out there, right? Indeed, AI software that's, combing through resumes. You, you know, Gone are the days. I think some of us have to get back to that instead of just straight Indeed, submit your resume, let AI comb through it. I think we miss out on a lot of good people, is what I would say, because not everyone understands the skills of writing a resume that grabs your attention. I've hired many of people that I've spoke to on the phone, because they just had something about them, charisma, or they spoke to me in a manner that I believed it. Right? They started building trust with me right away based on the words they said. So I'd bring them in for an interview and just fall in love with them and just go, when can you start? So we're still using some of the old ways mixed in with some of this, the job hunt ways and things such as that.
Yeah. So, based on what you say, so in one way, you have to keep the top quality care for the
Yeah.
residents, and in the other side, you have to keep your the business like a profitable and sustainable.
Mm.
So, is there must be like a fine line between them? How do you balance that with your business, with the company you're running?
Well, I mean, the biggest way to balance this is when payroll week comes up, you're monitoring. The smart operators are monitoring their labor about 3 days into that first week, right? They're projecting, they have budgeted hours. By the third day, they know if they're going to meet that budgeted hour for the week. If they're not going to meet it, then they need to make careful reductions to meet it, right? So if I gave you a budget and said, you can run 168 hours a week in the care department, and on Wednesday you're at, let's say you're at, 100 hours. Well, I've got 68 hours to use over the next 4 days. So we're going to have to make some reductions. And probably some of the other staff are going to have to lend a hand so that we can make those reductions and meet those goals. So there is a fine line. We have to teach that business acumen to these directors, it's not, like, again, it's not an easy business. So it's a lot when you're throwing a lot of these metrics at them: operating expense ratio, labor to revenue, revenue per unit, expense per unit. When you're throwing a lot of these key metrics at them, um, it's a lot to understand if you're not in the business world, so to speak, right? But that fine line starts with, um, understanding where your budget is and how you're trying to get there. And if you're going to be over budget, what reductions you need to make to stay as close to it as possible, right? So that's the fine line.
Wow.
Mhm.
I love that.
Great.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. And now I have a question. So take me to your shop. Take me. I'm a fly on the wall, and I want to hear like a story that really captures the heart of what the team does for the residents. Something that lets you realize and remember, this is why I get up and I do this every day. I'm sure
Yeah.
you have some kind of personal stories because this is more than just a business. There's a heart in here as well. So I want to
Yeah.
hear some of the hard stuff.
Well, probably the one that, and it happens quite a bit. And it's happened to me. I've been in this now since the 99, 2000, somewhere around there. So, and one that you hear quite a bit about is, you know, a lot of times our residents are forgotten about, right? It's unlike other cultures, the parents don't always move in with the children. In other cultures, you see that quite a bit. In our culture, so to speak, we build these great, beautiful places for your mom to go enjoy her days at, Rest Easy senior housing or whatever. And the children have lives, they're out and about. They've got kids playing soccer or football or whatever. And they get a visit from their children. They get a visit. Mom gets a visit maybe once a couple months, or if they're out of town, it might be during the holidays or whatnot. So, the story goes is that we become their family member. I have multiple times have walked through a memory care unit and have played the son. I have played the husband. I know that sounds weird, but I have. My whole part is to keep them as comfortable as possible and to make sure that I'm engaged in the moment with them. And we expect the staff to do the same. They see us every day. We're
Mhm.
we now they bank on us. They look forward to seeing us. And when we sometimes can get a little um, disappointed when we only see a family member twice a year, right? And then there's a laundry list of things to fix because I feel guilty because I've only came around twice this year to see my mom, right? So we get a little sometimes on our side where like, we have to remember we're in a customer service based industry. We have to kind of remember, to kind of bite our tongue, you know, yeah, I see mom every single day. I understand. I'm here to help her. I'm here to help you. I want to ease whatever you have going on. But, you know, that's the story that I tell the most is how we become their family members, how we are playing that role, and how we are helping them, and they look forward to seeing us. When they don't see you, if you're in a building, you've been in a building for, you know 5 years as an administrator, and you're gone for a week, you would think that you were blood relatives, right? Because these people start asking, "How are you? Where were you? Are you okay? Is everything okay? I didn't see you last week." I mean, they look forward to it when you're doing your rounds and you're walking through the dining room after a week of being on vacation. These residents, they want to hear, where'd you go? I was really worried. No one told me you were on vacation, right? I was on vacation. I'm sorry. I should have let the staff know to let you guys know that everything was okay. Where'd you go? Tell me all about it. I went to Niagara Falls. Oh my goodness. Me and my husband went there 25, 30 years ago. Did you go here? So you do become their family members, and that's the story. That's the story.
Mhm. Wow. Wow. That's really touching. Especially if you have to play son or husband,
Oh
one
yeah.
of the guests. Oh wow, that
Hmm. Yeah.
but as well as the guests and residents, and so you have to build a trust with their families, well, with their childrens too, right?
Yeah.
So what's the secret to be in a good communication to build a trust with them?
I mean, it's right from the get go, from day one. So inquiry, phone call, the tour. You schedule the tour, and you've closed the tour. Because it's sales, right? You've closed the tour, and now you've scheduled a move-in date. If you've got to be right up front with what you can and can't do, what you can provide, what you can't provide. You have to be an open book to what the expectations are, right? And you have to have that back and forth communication. and I have to ask them, like, what are you expecting from us? Because again, like we talked about with the misconception, I need to be able to explain to them, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, right? So I think that starts the role. And some of that trust building, and some of those conversations are not easy, right? They're not easy. um, you're still going to get a phone call as the primary caregiver, as the son or daughter. You're still going to get a phone call. Here's when you're going to get calls from us, right? Here's what we're going to need your help on. It's a two-way street. You have to help me as much as I have to help you. So I think having those conversations right from the get-go, instead of just painting this big rosy picture and it's all flowers and rainbows, it's not always that way. And communities that do that, I would guarantee, if I saw their retention rate number, another a metric, if I saw their retention rate or their turnover rate with residents, I would say that they have a lesser retention rate and a higher turnover rate, based on, you sold me a dream and you can't provide that dream, versus me saying, here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, here's what I really am going to make sure that happens. But we are going to have some things. I'll give you an example. Falls are a perfect example. And if I'm honest right from the get go, I cannot stop your loved one from falling. I can't do it. What I can do is I can limit the risk of the fall. And how do we do that? Okay. Well, we're going to do that with proper assessments. We're going to do that with gait training. We're going to do that with physical therapy that we bring in. We're going to do that with activity, engagement. We're going to look at the room. We're going to suggest that you don't bring mom's favorite throw rug that she's had for 20 years that she got from Persia. I'm sorry, but you can't have it. It's a trip hazard, right? I can reduce the risk of the fall, but you have to help me out too. So that is a truthful and honest communication with a loved one, because maybe that's why mom is there, because she had a fall. And they're looking to say, well, I'm going to move mom to a community because I don't want her to fall again. Well, she's probably going to fall, unfortunately, but I'm going to do my best to reduce the risk of that fall. So that's basically how you build the trust.
Wow.
Great.
Thank you so much
Great.
for that. That was actually really good. And I think it gives people the whole 360 perspective of the good, the bad, the ugly, all the sides, the stakeholders involved, the many
Mhm.
metrics you have to focus on, and the various challenges and opportunities. But also, what you're doing is more than just business. It's also a passion. It's a purpose. It is definitely a service, a heart service.
Mhm.
And I want to thank you for sharing us that insight. But now we want to go into part two.